program is produced by Indigenous Language Research and Development Center, ILRDC, in Taipei, with the purpose of updating our international audience with the most recent development of Indigenous studies here in Taiwan. Today, we are very happy that we have a PhD candidate from Stanford University here with us, Mr. Domo Nori Sugimoto. Thank you for coming to the center this evening, Domo.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where did you go to school?
So I'm Japanese, and I was born and raised in Hokkaido. Attended university in Tokyo, and I did my master's in anthropology at the University of California, San Diego. And after 2 years there, I moved to Stanford. And I'm currently a third-year student there in the anthropology department. A third-year PhD student. And since July last year, I have been a visiting fellow at Academia Sinica in Taiwan, doing fieldwork for my PhD dissertation.
Okay, so that's why we can have you here in the center in Taipei,
Right, yeah.
because you're doing your fieldwork research. Could you tell us more about your PhD dissertation and the work that you're doing right now in Taipei, Taiwan?
Sure.
Why specifically Taipei or Taiwan? And is it in any way related to your master's studies previously?
Sure. So my master's thesis was about, the history of colonialism, especially in relationship to indigenous people in Hokkaido, Japan, and Taiwan. And it was a comparative study about indigenous experience since the last since the 19th century or so. And I wanted to look at how colonial policies instituted by Japan, and also the Republic of China in Taiwan in the post-war period, affected indigenous experience. And after writing that MA thesis, because my master's thesis was mostly based on archival research. I wanted to know more about Taiwan because I knew less about it, and so I kind of wanted to focus my PhD dissertation on Taiwan. So that's why I kind of started to prepare for fieldwork here. My dissertation specifically discusses, I would say, this urban contestation over urban indigenous communities built on state-owned land in the Taipei region. And these communities are called like Weijian Bulo or He'an Bulo. Illegally built communities or illegally built indigenous communities, or riverside indigenous communities. And I am interested in these communities because there's this huge conversation about whether to relocate these communities, because they are occupying state-owned land illegally. And if they have to relocate, to where and how, right? And I just find this conversation really interesting because because so many people are involved in this conversation, from city officials and
the indigenous communities.
Residents of the communities, and of course housing activists, indigenous activists, urban planners, architects, and they're all thinking about like what to do with these communities. And I think the conversation they're having is really significant because it's about it's about this kind of emerging relationship between the state, the city,
Yes.
and indigenous people.
And the mixed populations
Yeah,
in the city.
right. And also about what kind of rights and space indigenous people can claim once they move to cities, once they move to places they're not really indigenous to. So I've been conducting fieldwork among, of course, community residents, but also
City officials,
yeah,
as
city
well,
officials, and
agencies, city planners.
exactly. So that's what I've been doing.
Well, it's great, and it's really related to indigenous peoples nowadays, especially more than half of the indigenous populations here in Taiwan has moved to the cities.
Yeah.
But let me just go back a little bit to
Yeah.
your master's thesis, which is a comparison between Japan's Ainu and Taiwan's indigenous peoples. I have two questions here. First is, was that period of Japanese colonization related or in some way inspiring your study of the comparison?
Yeah.
And also the second question is, can you tell us a little bit about your findings? What do you find in that research?
Right. So I guess I argue in the thesis that Taiwanese indigenous experience and Ainu experience are related somehow because of their shared experience of Japanese colonialism. And I mean, officially in 1945, Japanese colonialism ended, right? But in fact, a lot of, especially with regard to indigenous communities, a lot of colonial policies instituted before 1945 will kind of continue in the post-war period. The
with a new government.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, especially in Taiwan, the Republic of China came here, and they were officially anti-Japan, but they actually, preserved a lot of institutions that the Japanese colonial government built. So I think this comparison kind of made it clear for me that indigenous experience can be kind of understood better through a transnational or comparative lens.
Yeah. Especially a lot of indigenous communities in the world, they have shared experiences.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, in my thesis, I compared Japan and Taiwan, but what happened in like the United States and Canada, of course, affected what was done to indigenous people here in Asia too. So
So it's very interesting that you find something, the shared colonialism, the experience between Ainu and indigenous peoples. But as you say, the urban indigenous populations are facing a lot of challenges nowadays, right? So we come to that context right now. What do you think are the problems that they are facing right now, in addition to the illegal settlement that you were talking about? That you were
in
researching?
Taiwan specifically.
Yes, or you can refer to other indigenous communities as well.
Yeah, I mean, of course, once indigenous people move to urban areas, you are no longer in a place you're indigenous to. So how to kind of preserve their indigenous languages or cultures or traditions or kind of simple ties to their own families. Like these things kind of become difficult, right? So, and I mean, maybe simple things like identification, like people's identity as indigenous people might change too. Because
Do you see that in the communities that you're visiting here in Taipei? That people experience certain difficulty with identifying themselves as indigenous?
I think I think like between younger generations and older generations, I think there's a slightly different understanding about who they are, I feel. And I think older people I meet at least tend to identify more with their own tribe, So like if they're Amis or Panza people, they just kind of identify as Panza or Amis, or if they're a tile, or they just identify as a tile instead of this kind of pan-tribal Yuanzumi,
Oh, okay.
And when older people kind of say something like, "Oh, I'm Yuanzumi," they actually mean I'm Amis, I'm a Panza, or I'm a tile, So they don't really necessarily have kind of pan-tribal identification.
The elder generation.
Yeah,
yes.
whereas I think younger people tend to have, because their kind of ties to their own tribe are maybe, or their tribal cultures or languages might be kind of less strong than their parents or grandparents. I feel, but they still identify as Yuanzumi, but kind of more pan-tribal way. So it's it seems much easier for younger indigenous people to kind of identify with people from different tribes. Like college students at NTU, National Taiwan University, or at other universities who are in these pan-tribal indigenous groups, or they seem to have this kind of identity.
So certainly when indigenous peoples, they moved from their original villages to the city areas, they face a lot of challenges in identity, in language, in cultural continuance, and also in finding housing.
Right.
Incredible housing. But can you, in your observation, do you find any opportunities that they have? Do they are there good things happening in this movement from villages to urban settings?
Yeah, so I don't see this kind of displacement, in a negative way at all, because as you said, I think like for Amis people, for example, they. I think when they're back home, they are kind of people of their own village, right? But once they move to cities, they meet people, Amis people from all these different villages, and in a way, this really interesting pan-Amis kind of language and culture develops.
So they develop a different vibe.
Right. It is still a Amis culture, but this urban Amis culture, and I think that's true of other tribes as well, right? So I think this kind of possibility to meet, people from different tribes, people from different villages, that opens up. Lots of great opportunities for, building a coalition or starting a new kind of indigenous movement, or
Yes, there can be new opportunities.
Exactly.
Kind of, movement instead of taking it as a displacement. As you said.
Exactly.
So to take better use, better advantage of this opportunities, what kind of policies do you think that should be implemented to help indigenous peoples in the urban areas to make the best use of their stay in the city?
It's a really difficult question, and I guess because it's difficult, I'm interested. But for example, in one of the public housing complexes I do research in, because residents of this housing complex were relocated from a community in the mountains where they were living. They kind of lack space to kind of grow vegetables or you know, so they actually still go back to where they used to live. It's still in Taipei, but in the mountains, and they kind of grow vegetables there. So I don't know. I feel like there should be, but you know they're using the land still illegally.
Yeah.
You know, so I feel like there should be some kind of policy that allows, indigenous people in urban areas, if they wish to use, like some space, some land for growing vegetables,
Yeah.
or you know, because this
There
is
should
an
be new like a city planning,
Mhm,
especially regarding to the use of land.
yeah, exactly.
To accommodate these needs of this indigenous
Yeah,
people,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. But land in Taiwan is the most difficult thing.
Yeah.
Taiwan is so small.
Right. Yeah. And I think with there are still a lot of Amis communities whose legal status is kind of contested. So I think the government should try to really legalize their presence.
Yeah.
Like let them be where they are. In my opinion. Yeah.
So as you mentioned, one of the challenges that urban indigenous communities face is the language. Are you studying any indigenous language in your field work?
Yeah. So I have been studying Amis Panza. I guess for several months now. Yeah.
Why Banza Amis? Because we know there are 16 languages here in Taiwan.
Right. Well, because most of the communities urban communities I work in are populated heavily by Amis people. So it just happens to be the language I hear most often. So
So after several months of study, what do you find the language? How do you find the language?
It's a fascinating language to study because it just has everything. It has Mandarin and Taiwanese.
Oh, you mean
and,
low words, the borrowings.
Yeah, and Japanese, and of course, and in its own Amis Anza words, vocabulary. So
Can you share a phrase?
like
And how do you say thank you in Amis? Have you learned that?
Adai.
Arai. Oh,
Yeah.
that's good. That's good.
Yeah, but a lot of people also say arigato, which is Japanese.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So there are a lot of low words. People use low words,
Yeah.
especially the elder generation.
Yeah. So in a way, it's easier for me to learn because, once I get some basic vocabulary, Amis itself, there are lots of long words already, so
Yeah.
I can kind of understand it to a certain extent. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But indeed, the indigenous languages here in Taiwan are facing endangerment, including Amis, even
Right.
spoken by the largest
Yes.
population.
Yes.
So, in your understanding, what do you think of the language revitalization policies right now implemented in Taiwan? Or do you see that also happening in Japan for the Ainu people?
Yeah. So I think we're in a really interesting moment right now because on the one hand, there has never been a moment like this where the government is encouraging indigenous people to speak their own languages.
Yes, it's kind of reversing history.
Yeah, exactly. Before 1990, the only thing they did was to try to eliminate, or destroy these languages, right? And now indigenous languages are taught in school. And on the other hand, we don't really see any positive effects of these government policies to revitalize indigenous languages.
What do you think the reason is?
And I think the reason is that they I think their vision is really unclear, and they don't really know themselves in what form they want to revitalize indigenous languages, right? So do we want to revitalize indigenous languages as primary languages in which indigenous people live, you know? Or are they going to be like secondary languages while Japanese or Chinese remain as primary languages of communication? Or are indigenous languages going to be like Latin or ancient Greek, whose beauty we appreciate, but you know we cannot speak? So unless we have a clear vision of in what form we want to preserve or revitalize indigenous languages, we can't really revitalize them in any way.
Yeah,
right?
I agree with you.
Right.
Yes,
So
yes.
I think if we have a vision, good policies, appropriate policies will follow naturally. You know? So I think it's really important for the government and also kind of activists and speakers themselves to come up with, in what form they want to speak it, use it, read it, write it.
Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of speakers, when you do your field work around these communities, do you see a strong motivation in learning their own language? Because motivation among the people themselves is actually vital for the success
Right.
of revitalization as well, in addition to a good policy.
Right. I see the motivation to be really low, to be honest. And currently, at least in my observation, fluent speakers are all over. They are kind of about the age of 60. And kind of people between 40 and 60 some of them can speak it, some of them can just understand it, and they can't really speak well. And under 40, almost nobody can really speak it that well. And I see some kids learning it in school, but it's not like they actually use it to communicate with their grandmothers or their grandfathers, right? But you know, in Taiwan, you know, sometimes like grandparents raise their grandchildren, right? And I see a lot of grandparents taking care of their grandchildren here in communities I do research in. So, you know, if those grandparents speak it to their grandchildren, you know, they might just naturally learn it.
Yeah.
But somehow they just speak Mandarin to their grandchildren, and they just speak amiss with their own friends.
Yeah.
So
I actually agree with your observation. In the center, that's what we face. And that's what we're trying to tell people actually. They have to start speaking the languages in the family.
Right.
In order to really bring it back to life.
Right, yeah.
So,
which is what revitalization means. Right?
Yes. So you do have a sharp eyes, you know, as a non-indigenous PhD student of anthropology, and you have a lot of thoughts and findings and observations. This is very interesting. So, as a non-indigenous intellectual, you're Japanese yourself. Why do you study indigenous peoples?
I think it's because I find indigenous studies to be a really exciting field, and especially indigenous studies in the United States, and I think Taiwan too is in a really exciting moment right now because it's kind of seeing this renaissance, right? Because so many young, talented, smart indigenous scholars like you are joining the field and revitalizing the conversation in a field kind of mostly dominated by in the case of the United States, white scholars. And in Taiwan, by Han Chinese scholars. And sadly, this Renaissance is not really happening in Japan. But so I think there's a lot of new perspectives about colonial history and the kind of the difficulties that indigenous people have faced. From native scholars themselves. And but I think at the same time, indigenous studies is becoming not just about indigenous people. It's not just about studying indigenous people, but it's becoming a field about the relationship between indigenous people and those who came after indigenous people or settlers. So I think it's a field about this kind of contact, the history of the contact, and of course, some might say, you're not indigenous. Why do you care about us indigenous people? But I think once indigenous studies kind of excludes non-indigenous scholars from it, I think it might face a deadlock. In that, because
probably you lose a lot of perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. And yes, I might be indigenous, but then again, so you're an indigenous man, so can you speak about indigenous women really? Or you're an able-bodied indigenous man, can you talk about disabled indigenous people? So I think this question kind of comes back to indigenous scholars themselves, right? So I think it's not about the scholar's identity ultimately, but it's about their perspective and how they look at indigenous history and how they look at the history of this contact between settlers and indigenous people. And I just find this field to be just going through so many transformations and exciting changes.
So it's an exciting field, and it's enlightening a lot of aspects of, can I say, human history. So what do you see indigenous peoples themselves? I have to come back to indigenous peoples. I am indigenous myself. I care about them tremendously. What do you see this study of indigenous peoples benefit, development, or the future of indigenous communities? How indigenous communities themselves can benefit from studying themselves?
Right. I think one good aspect is definitely about representation. And I think in Taiwan there's so much discussion about stereotypes that indigenous people still kind of suffer from, and I think once there's an indigenous voice in indigenous studies, which have lacked it for a long time, there's this question of representation definitely, and the question of kind of research ethics and because before non-indigenous scholars might not have cared too much about research ethics. They might have just gone to indigenous communities and they just took out data and and then they left. And sometimes what they did with the data they collected might not have been shared or might have been used to kind of perpetuate stereotypes of indigenous people.
So by involving in this indigenous studies, indigenous peoples actually are also improving the disciplines. And
I think
in a way also benefit from this participation because they can learn more about themselves. They can also change the way the studies are done.
Right. That's what we hope.
So we come to our final question right now. As I said, you're not indigenous, but if you were indigenous, what will you do to improve for your future? As you said, we see a lot of challenges facing and urban indigenous peoples, and they're up, and these communities still in the villages. There are also
Right.
challenges.
Right.
If you were indigenous yourself, what kind of things you would do for your community?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult
ever-
question.
Maybe I'm looking for answers from you.
Right. Yeah, but I think I would start with really small things, because if I were my age and indigenous, I probably would not speak my own language that well. So, yeah, as we just talked about it, I might just start with like learning my own language and try to speak it with my grandparents, or if I were to have like children, I would try to teach them my own history, which might not have been done like say 20 or 30 years ago because of the stigma about being indigenous. And
So
I think,
basically from small things, from
I
anything that you
think
can
so.
do.
Yeah, because I mean, we talk about grand things in indigenous studies, but it should be ultimately about how we live, and
Yes.
it should be about our everyday experience, and yeah.
So thank you very much for
Thank you.
having this conversation with Indigenous Studies, and thank you for watching this episode. Thank you.
Thank you.